Somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, further from any continent than almost anywhere else on Earth, a single island rises out of deep water. It is not the largest island in Hawaii, it is not the youngest, it is not the wildest. But almost everyone who comes to Hawaii comes here first. Millions of travelers land on this island every year. Most of them will spend their days on one beach, in one neighborhood, along one short stretch of the southern shore, and then they will fly home believing they have seen it. Beyond that shoreline, the ocean has carved the island open. A green wall of cliffs runs for tens of miles and stops the clouds dead. A valley holds the place where a war ended and a kingdom began. And at the exact center of the island, a ring of worn stones marks the ground where royalty came to be born. Here stood the only royal palace ever raised on American soil. Here a queen was overthrown inside her own home. Here on one December morning, the course of the 20th century changed in under 2 hours. And here, every winter, some of the largest rideable waves on the planet come ashore. Over the next hour, we are going to travel the entire coastline of this island, from the crater above Waikiki to the point in the west where the road simply stops, through sacred ground, through sunken fish ponds, through the ghost towns of the sugar era, and finally to a harbor that still holds a warship beneath its surface. Most visitors never leave the southern shore. We are going all the way around. The name of this island is old, and it is usually translated as the gathering place. It earned that long before the first hotel was ever built. This is Oahu, where a mountain fell into the sea. The island you are looking at is only part of what it used to be. Oahu was built by 2 volcanoes. The Waiʻanae Range in the west came first, rising from the seafloor and growing into a broad shield of lava. Long after it fell quiet, a second volcano began to build against its eastern flank. That one is called Kūkaniloko. For a time this island was 2 smooth domes joined at the middle. Nothing about it looked the way it looks today. Then it began to come apart. Geologists studying the seafloor east of Oahu have mapped enormous fields of broken rock lying on the ocean bottom. They are the remains of the mountain. At some point in the distant past, the entire eastern half of the Kūkaniloko volcano collapsed and slid into the Pacific. What was left behind was the inside of the mountain, an open wound of rock facing the sunrise. That wound is what visitors photograph today without knowing what they are looking at. The windward cliffs of this island are not a mountain range in the ordinary sense. They are a cross-section. Rain does the rest. Moist trade winds come in from the northeast, strike that wall, and are forced upward. The water they carry falls as rain. Over millions of years it cut the fluted valleys that make this coast look like something from a painting. The volcanoes made the island, the rain shaped it, and between them they produced ground that could feed more people than anywhere else in the chain, which is exactly why chiefs fought over this island for centuries. But the first thing most travelers ever see of Oahu is none of that. It is a beach, a narrow strip of imported sand beneath a wall of hotels, and underneath that sand lies a story that almost nobody arrives expecting. most photographed beach in the Pacific was once a wetland. Long before the towers, water ran down out of Mānoa and Puʻuloa valleys and spread across this flat ground before reaching the sea. Fresh springs rose here too. That is what the name refers to. Waikiki describes spouting or gushing water. Hawaiians farmed it. Terraces of taro covered the plain, fed by carefully managed streams. Fish ponds sat between the fields and the shore. It was one of the most productive pieces of ground on the island, and it belonged to the chiefs. They came here to rest, and they came here to surf. Surfing at Waikiki is not a modern invention layered onto an old place. It is the old thing that never stopped. The gentle waves offshore break slowly over a shallow reef, rolling for a long distance before they close. For a sport built on standing upright on moving water, there are few better classrooms anywhere on Earth. Then the wetland was drained. In the early 20th century, a canal was cut inland of the beach, redirecting the streams and drying the marshes. The taro fields disappeared. Hotels rose on the reclaimed ground. Within a few decades, one of the oldest agricultural landscapes on Oahu had become the most concentrated tourist district in the Pacific. And out of that changing shoreline came a man who carried Waikiki to the rest of the world. Duke Kahanamoku was born in Honolulu and learned the ocean here. He became an Olympic swimming champion, and then he did something that mattered even more. He traveled. He gave surfing demonstrations to crowds who had never seen anyone stand on a wave. Historians of the sport trace much of modern surf culture back to those demonstrations. California, Australia, places that now consider surfing part of their national identity, received it directly from this beach. So the strip that travelers dismiss as the least authentic place on the island is in fact the opposite. It is the point from which a Hawaiian tradition went global. Stand on that sand and look east, and one shape dominates everything. A low, broad silhouette at the end of the beach, watching the coast the way it has watched it since long before anyone here had a name for it. It looks like a mountain. It is actually the scar of a single explosion. The crater above Waikiki has an English name that comes from a mistake. Sailors landing here in the 19th century found glittering crystals in the rock of its slopes and believed they had found diamonds. They had found calcite. The name stuck anyway. Hawaiians call it Lēʻahi. The name is usually understood to describe the shape of the ridgeline, compared to the brow or forehead of a fish. What created it was not the slow building of a shield volcano. It was far more violent and far more recent. Rising magma met water trapped in the rock beneath the surface. The water flashed instantly into steam. The eruption that followed was explosive rather than flowing, and it threw out clouds of fine ash instead of rivers of lava. That ash settled in rings around the vent. Then it hardened into stone. What remains is a bowl of cemented ash roughly a mile across, standing on the edge of the sea. Look carefully at the rim and you will notice it is not even. One side stands considerably higher than the other. Geologists explain this simply. The trade winds were blowing during the eruption, and they carried the falling ash further in one direction than the other. The crater is, in a sense, a permanent record of the weather on a single day hundreds of thousands of years ago. Then the military found it. The United States Army recognized what the Hawaiians already knew. Whoever holds this crater watches the entire southern approach to the island. In the early 20th century, the interior became a fortification. Tunnels were driven through the rim. A spiral staircase was cut into the rock. At the summit, observers in a concrete station could direct a fire of coastal guns hidden along the shore below. Those guns never fired at an enemy. The tunnels and the station are still there, and today they form part of the most walked trail on the island. From the summit, the city spreads out below, dense and modern and apparently very new, but among those rooftops stands a building that belongs to a different Hawaii altogether. One that had a throne, a crown, and a queen. There was electric light inside this building 4 years before there was electric light in the White House. That single fact tends to undo everything people assume about 19th century Hawaii. This was not an isolated society waiting to be discovered. It was an internationally recognized kingdom with treaties, embassies, a constitution, and a monarch who had traveled the world and come home determined to build something that would command respect. King Kalakaua raised this palace in the 1880s. It has a style all its own, borrowing from European royal architecture and adapting it to the tropics. Wide verandas, tall windows, a throne room hung with portraits of European royalty who had corresponded with the Hawaiian court as equals. The king had met Thomas Edison in New York. He came back convinced. In the summer of 1886, he had electric lights demonstrated on the palace grounds, and thousands of people came to see it. By June of 1887, the interior of the palace was lit by more than 300 incandescent bulbs. The city of Honolulu followed the year after that. Washington would wait until 1891. It did not last a decade. In January 1893, a group of businessmen backed by American commercial interests and supported by the landing of United States troops moved against the monarchy. Queen Liliuokalani, Kalakaua's sister and successor, chose not to fight. She surrendered under protest, expecting the United States government to review what had been done in its name and restore her. It never did. Two years later, after a failed attempt by royalists to return her to the throne, the Queen was arrested. She was tried, convicted, and confined upstairs in her own palace. For months she lived as a prisoner in the building she had once ruled from, allowed almost no visitors and very little news. She wrote music there. She worked on a quilt that recorded, stitch by stitch, what was happening to her and to her country. That quilt survives, and visitors can still see it. palace afterwards became government offices. For most of the 20th century, the legislature of the territory and then the state of Hawaii met inside these rooms, and much of the original interior was stripped away. Restoring it took decades of work and a great deal of tracking down of furniture that had been sold off. A few streets away, two other buildings complete the story. Kawaiahao Church stands built from slabs of coral cut by hand from the living reef offshore. And in Nuʻuanu, behind iron gates, lies the Royal Mausoleum, where most of the Hawaiian monarchs now rest. The kingdom ended in that throne room, but a few streets in the other direction, another Hawaii was already being born, not by decree and not by treaty, but by arrival. In 1900, the authorities in Honolulu set fire to this neighborhood on purpose. Plague had reached the port. The response was to burn the buildings where cases had been found, block by block, under control. On one January day, the wind rose, the flames jumped the fire break, and the fire escaped. It burned through Chinatown and left thousands of people, most of them Chinese and Japanese residents, with nothing. They rebuilt. Much of what stands in Chinatown today dates from the years immediately after that fire, which is why the district has the architectural feel of a single moment, rather than a slow accumulation. But the fire is not the real story here. The real story is why so many people were living in this port in the first place. Sugar. From the middle of the 19th century, plantations spread across the islands, and they needed labor on a scale the Hawaiian population could not supply, particularly after introduced diseases had devastated it. So the planters recruited abroad, and they did it in waves. Workers came from China, then from Japan, in very large numbers, then from Portugal, particularly from Madeira and the Azores, then from Puerto Rico, from Korea, and from the Philippines. Each group arrived into a system designed to keep them separate and to keep wages low. It did not work the way the planters intended. In the camps and the fields, people who shared no common language had to find one. What emerged was a Creole, still spoken across Hawaii today, built from Hawaiian, English, Portuguese, Japanese, Chinese, and more. The food went the same way. The plate lunch, the noodle houses, the bakeries, the shave ice. Almost nothing eaten daily in Hawaii today traces to a single origin, because the population that eats it does not either. Hawaii now records one of the highest proportions of people identifying with more than one race of any state in the United States. That did not happen by accident, and it did not happen recently. It happened here, over generations, in plantation camps and port neighborhoods like this one. The people who built this city came from across the Pacific and beyond, but the thing that fed them all came from above. Follow the streets inland, and they run out exactly where the rain begins. Three miles inland from Waikiki, the rainfall increases roughly eightfold. That is not a figure of speech. Waikiki receives somewhere close to 20 inches of rain in a year. The back of Mānoa Valley, measured at a weather station near the head of it, averages around 150. Two places, a short drive apart, living in completely different climates. The reason is the wall. Trade winds arrive loaded with moisture off the open Pacific. When they meet the Puʻuloa cliffs, they have nowhere to go but up. Rising air cools. Cooling air cannot hold its water. So the rain falls on the mountains and in the valleys behind the city, and almost none of it reaches the beach. Geographers call it orographic rainfall. In Hawaii, it is simply the shape of daily life. Visitors in Waikiki routinely look inland in the afternoon and watch a solid grey wall of weather sitting over Manoa, 3 miles away, while they stand in full sun. Walk into that valley, and the island changes character completely. The trail to Manoa Falls runs through dripping forest, past bamboo and enormous trees, to a thin ribbon of water dropping something like 150 feet down a dark rock face. Beside the trailhead sits something stranger. The Lion Arboretum covers close to 200 acres of the upper valley and holds thousands of plant species. It was not founded by botanists or by the government. It was founded in 1918 by the Hawaiian Sugar Planters Association. The reason is uncomfortable and revealing. The sugar industry had helped strip the island's forests, and stripped forests do not hold water. Without water there is no irrigation, and without irrigation there is no sugar. So the planters built a research station to work out how to put a forest back. The University of Hawaii took it over decades later. The valleys are where Oahu is soft. Follow the shoreline east instead, and within a few miles the island stops being soft entirely. Hanauma Bay is a volcano that the ocean broke into. The crater formed the same way Diamond Head did. Rising magma met water, the eruption turned explosive, and rings of ash hardened into rock. But this cone had a weakness on its seaward side. Waves worked at it for thousands of years until the wall gave way and the Pacific poured in. What it left is a sheltered bowl of shallow water sitting inside a volcanic crater, protected from open ocean swell. Coral moved in, fish followed, and eventually so did everyone else. By the late 20th century, the bay was being loved to pieces. It had been declared a marine life conservation district in 1967, but protection on paper did not slow the crowds. Millions of people were arriving, standing on coral, feeding fish, and gradually degrading the thing they had come to see. In 1990, the city finally began managing it properly. The pandemic produced an accidental experiment. With the bay closed, researchers watched fish behavior change and water clarity improve within weeks. When it reopened with rules, reservations, a daily visitor cap, an entry fee for non-residents, 2 days a week when nobody comes at all, and the reef simply rests. It is one of the clearest examples anywhere of a destination deciding that fewer visitors is the point. Beyond the bay, the coastline hardens. The road runs along black lava benches, where the sea throws itself at the rock and sends spray 20 feet into the air. At Haleʻiwa, a lava tube funnels the swell upward into a blowhole. At Sandy Beach, the waves break directly onto the sand with enough force to break bones, which is exactly why body surfers love it. Above it all sits Koko Crater, with the scar of an old tramway running straight up its flank like a ladder. Then the island runs out. Mānoa Point is the easternmost tip of Oahu, and on the cliff below the trail stands a lighthouse that has been burning since 1909. Its tower is short, only around 46 feet, but the light sits 420 feet above the sea, and behind the glass is a hyper-radial lens, the largest lighthouse lens in the United States, roughly 12 feet tall. Offshore lie two islets, Mānoa, which everyone calls Rabbit Island, and Kaʻaʻawa beside it. Both are seabird sanctuaries now. The southeast coast is where Oahu shows its teeth. Round the last headland, and the island changes its mind entirely. Long before Honolulu existed, the center of power on this island was here. That is difficult to believe standing on Kailua Beach today, looking at a stretch of pale sand and impossibly clear water. But this side of the island had what mattered: fresh water, deep soil, safe canoe landings, and one enormous, reliable source of food. Behind the modern town lies Kawainui. Today it is a marsh of roughly 830 acres, the largest remaining wetland in Hawaii, and a protected site of international importance. It is also a ghost. For centuries, Kawainui was a working fish pond, covering hundreds of acres, stocked with mullet and other fish, ringed by irrigated taro terraces. Feeding a district was not incidental here. It was engineering. On a rise at the edge of the wetland stands Ulupo Heiau. Its stone platform is enormous, with walls reaching up to about 30 feet in places. Archaeologists believe it began as an agricultural temple connected to the fish pond and the fields, and that a later warrior chief may have converted it to a different and far more serious purpose. Between the marsh and the sea lies the reason everyone else comes: Kailua Bay, and just around the point, Lanikai. Offshore sit the Mokulēʻia islets, two green humps that have become one of the most photographed shapes in the Pacific. Hawaiian tradition offers another explanation for its construction. The stones, it is said, were passed hand to hand across the island by the menehune in a single night. The water here is calm because of geography. Offshore reefs break the incoming swell before it reaches the sand, and the bay faces slightly away from the prevailing wind. The result is a shoreline that behaves more like a lagoon than an ocean. Climb the ridge above Lanikai, and the whole arrangement becomes visible at once. The trail passes concrete observation posts left over from the Second World War, when this coast was watched around the clock. From up there, the islets sit in water that shifts through 4 distinct colors in a few hundred meters. South along the coast, Waimanalo runs for miles, long and straight and noticeably quieter than anything to the north. And for all its calm, this whole shore has a wall at its back, a green rampart that runs the length of the island. In one place, that wall became the end of a war. In 1898, a road crew working at the base of this cliff dug up 800 human skulls. They had not found a burial ground. They had found the end of a battle fought 100 years earlier, and the moment the Hawaiian Islands stopped being separate kingdoms. Stand at the foot of the Pali and look up. The cliff rises roughly 1,000 feet, almost sheer, fluted with green ridges. The wind pours over the top of it constantly, funneled through the gap in the range, hard enough to make it difficult to stand still. In May of 1795, this is where an army was pushed. Kamehameha had already taken Hawaii Island, Maui, and Molokai. Oahu remained, held by a chief named Kalaniʻi. Kamehameha crossed the channel with a force that historical accounts put in the region of 10,000 warriors, carried in roughly 1,200 canoes, and armed with muskets and cannon supplied and worked by foreign advisors. They landed on the southern shore, near where Waikiki stands today. Then they pushed inland. The fighting moved up Nuʻuanu Valley. Kamehameha sent part of his force onto the heights to clear the defending cannon and brought his own guns forward. A senior Oahu commander named Kaʻena was wounded and died. With its leadership collapsing, the Oahu army fell back and kept falling back up the narrowing valley toward the head of it. Where the valley ends, the ground ends. Accounts of how many warriors went over the edge vary considerably, from several hundred to well over 700. What every account agrees on is that they were trapped between an advancing army and a 1,000-foot drop, and that some jumped rather than be taken. Kalaniʻi escaped that day. He was hunted down later, captured and sacrificed. Within a few years, Kamehameha ruled every island in the chain, and the Hawaiian kingdom that would later build a palace in Honolulu began here, at the bottom of this cliff. The mountain kept what happened. Below it, the land opens into a bay so wide it holds islands of its own, and one stretch of that shore was forbidden to almost everyone alive. The bay you are looking at is the inside of a volcano. When the eastern flank of the Ko'olau Shield collapsed into the Pacific, it left a curved hollow in the coast. The sea came in, coral built up along the outer edge. What formed is unlike anything else in the main Hawaiian Islands. Kāneʻohe Bay covers around 17 square miles, which makes it the largest sheltered body of water in the main islands. More unusually, it has a true barrier reef. There are only 2 in the whole archipelago. the other lies off Molokai. That reef changes everything. It takes the force out of the open ocean and leaves a lagoon of shallow, patterned water dotted with coral heads. At low tide, a sandbar surfaces in the middle of the bay, called Ahu Olaka, and for a few hours there is dry land where there was none. At the northern end stands a small pointed island. Its Hawaiian name is Mokulēʻia. Most visitors know it by a nickname it acquired much later, based on its shape. And on the shore facing it lies Puʻuloa. This ground was sacred. This park was reserved to the chiefs, one of the most important places on the island, and traditional accounts connect it with the voyaging chief Lēʻahi, who sailed here from Tahiti. Ordinary people did not simply walk across it. Today it is a working ranch and a film location, and the cliffs behind it are among the most recognizable images of Hawaii on Earth. Very few of the people photographing them know what the ground underneath meant. Further along the bay, two other places are worth the detour. The Botanical Garden sits directly beneath the Koʻolau wall, and its entrance road runs straight at the cliffs, framing them so completely that the mountains fill the windscreen. And in a valley nearby stands something genuinely unexpected. The Byodo-in Temple is a scale replica of an 11th century hall at Uji in Japan, built without nails and dedicated in 1968 to mark 100 years since the first Japanese immigrants arrived in Hawaii. A 3-ton brass bell hangs beside the pond. Koi move under the bridge. Behind it, the green wall rises 2,000 feet. Kualoa belonged to the chiefs. The coast beyond it belonged to anyone who could read water, because along this shore, Hawaiians did something with the sea that very few civilizations have ever managed. Along this coast, Hawaiians farmed the ocean. Not fished it, farmed it. The structures are still visible from the road, low curving walls of black stone reaching out from the shoreline and enclosing whole sections of the sea. They are called lokoʻia. The design is deceptively simple and quietly brilliant. A wall of lava rock and coral, built by hand, encloses a shallow area of coast. Set into that wall is a wooden grate called a makaha. The gaps in the grate are sized deliberately. Small fish swim in freely with the tide. They feed on the algae growing in the warm, shallow water. They grow, and once they have grown, they can no longer fit back out through the grate. Nobody feeds them. The tide does the work, twice a day, for centuries. At Kualoa sits Mokulēʻia, one of the largest surviving ponds in Hawaii, at around 125 acres. Estimates of its age range from roughly 600 to nearly 1,000 years. It is still in use today. Further north, in the valley at Kahana, lies Hūʻailua, a national historic landmark that was still being worked well into the 20th century. Those two are rare survivors. Historical surveys suggest hundreds of fish ponds were operating across the islands at the time of Western contact. On Oahu, only 4 original ponds remain. Most of the rest were buried, dredged, filled for development, or quarried for roadstone. An entire food system, dismantled inside a century. It is coming back slowly, pond by pond, with volunteers hauling stone exactly the way it was done the first time. Behind the coast, Kaʻena Valley runs deep into the mountains. It is one of the last places on Oahu where you can still see the shape of an ahu pua'a, the traditional land division that ran from the ridge to the reef, uplands for timber and birds, middle slopes for taro, shore for fish, one community, one valley, everything it needed. The road here is narrow and green and slow. Further north it passes Lēʻahi, where a cultural center opened in 1963 now draws visitors by the million. And then Kahuku, where a sugar mill ran for 80 years and shut down in 1971. 2 versions of the same century, a few miles apart. Kahuku marks the turn. From here the coast faces open ocean with nothing between it and the far North Pacific. In summer it sleeps. In winter it becomes the most watched water on Earth. Twice a year this coastline becomes a different ocean. In summer, Waiʻanae Bay is a sheet of glass. Families swim. Children jump off the rock at the eastern end. The water is so clear you can count fish from the sand. In winter, the same bay can kill you. The reason begins thousands of miles away. Storms spin up in the far North Pacific, some of them approaching hurricane strength, and although they never come near Hawaii, the energy they generate does. That energy travels south across open ocean as swell, organizing itself as it goes, and arrives here days later with nothing in its path to slow it down. The North Shore is simply where it lands. 7 miles of coast, reef after reef, each one shaped to turn that swell into something rideable. At Pipeline, the reef sits shallow and close to shore, so waves stand up abruptly and throw forward into an almost perfect hollow tube over very little water. It is the most photographed wave in the world, and one of the most dangerous. And at Waimea, big wave surfing began. One name belongs to this bay more than any other. Eddie Aikau was the first lifeguard here, credited with more than 500 rescues, and by the accounts of those who worked with him, never losing anyone. In 1978, he was crewing the voyaging canoe Mokulēʻia when it capsized in the channel between islands. He paddled a surfboard toward land to get help. He was never found. The surfing event named for him is deliberately almost impossible to hold. It only runs when the waves consistently reach around 20 feet on the Hawaiian scale, which means faces of 30 to 40 feet. Since the 1980s, it has been held only a handful of times. Some years the invitation goes out and the ocean simply never delivers. Behind the bay, the island gets quieter fast. Waiʻanae Valley runs inland with botanical gardens and a waterfall at the end of it, on ground that was cultivated and inhabited for centuries. And on the bluff above, overlooking everything, sits Puʻuloa. It is the largest heiau on Oahu, covering about 2 acres of hilltop, built several hundred years ago. From up there, the whole bay lies below, the surf, the valley mouth, the horizon where the swells come from. The waves leave in spring. What stays behind is a coastline of small towns that were never built for surfers at all. In October 1996, the last sugar plantation on Oahu shut down. The Waialua mill had been running, in one form or another, since 1865. More than a century, thousands of people from China, Japan, Korea, Portugal and the Philippines had come here to work it, raised families here, and made this corner of the island their home. Then the arithmetic stopped working, and it ended. The building is still standing. Today the old mill houses small businesses, workshops and a coffee operation, because the land that once grew cane now grows coffee and cacao instead. It is a quieter economy on a smaller scale, and it employs a fraction of the people. That pattern repeats all the way around this island. When sugar ended, what replaced it was tourism, not just as an industry, but as the thing that now pays for culture to be practiced, performed and passed on at all. Whether that counts as preservation is a question people here have been arguing about for 60 years, and they have not settled it. Just north sits Haleʻiwa. The town began as a plantation and railway settlement, and its wooden storefronts and low awnings still look the part. What fills them now is surf shops, shave ice, and food trucks. In winter, the population of the North Shore swells with people who have come for the waves, and the town absorbs all of it. Follow the coast west from Waialua, and the traffic disappears. Mokulēʻia is a long green shelf of land between the mountains and the sea, with horse pastures, empty beaches, and almost nothing built on it. Running through the middle of it is a 9,000-foot runway. The airfield here is one of the strangest and most useful things on the island. It is a joint military and civilian field, and its main civilian use is gliders and skydivers. Engineless aircraft are towed up over the mountain range, released, and then ride the air rising off the mountains in complete silence, sometimes for an hour at a time. Its future was genuinely uncertain for years. The state had been trying to give up the lease. In 2024, a long-term agreement was finally signed with the army, and the field was formally renamed Kaʻena Point, restoring the Hawaiian name of the land it sits on. There is older history under that runway too. On the morning of 7 December 1941, fighter aircraft were dispersed at the North Shore airstrips. 2 pilots got airborne from the field at Haleʻiwa and shot down attacking planes. It was one of the very few pieces of American air resistance that morning. West of the old mills, the pavement narrows, then it thins, then it simply stops. Beyond that point, the ancient Hawaiians believed the living had no more business. The road around Oahu does not actually go around Oahu. Follow the coast west from the old sugarlands and the pavement ends. Follow it north from the leeward towns, and it ends there too. Between those two dead ends lies a gap of a few miles that no road has ever closed. To cross it you walk. This is Kaʻena, the westernmost tip of the island, and the emptiest place on it. The track runs along an old railbed above the water, past sea cliffs and tide pools, with the Waiʻanae range rising steeply on one side and open ocean on the other. Vehicles were banned from the reserve in the late 1980s after decades of damage to the dunes. What has happened since is one of the quiet conservation successes of the Pacific. In 2011, a fence was completed here. It is only about half a mile long and a little over 6 feet high, and it was the first predator-proof fence of its kind built in the United States. Behind it, across roughly 59 acres, rats, mice, cats and mongooses were removed entirely. The birds came back immediately. Laysan albatross nest here now in growing numbers, birds with wingspans approaching 7 feet that spend years at sea and return to the same patch of sand to raise a single chick. Wedge-tailed shearwaters nest in the thousands. Monk seals, among the most endangered marine mammals on Earth, haul out on the rocks to rest and to pup. But the reason this place mattered long before any of that is harder to photograph. Inside the reserve stands a large stone. In Hawaiian tradition, Kaʻena is a leaping place of souls. Every island had one, and every one of them faced west. This was understood to be the point where the spirits of the dead left the land of the living. Beyond the fence there is a Coast Guard beacon left from the years when this was a military reservation, and then nothing at all. Just rock, salt spray, birds, and the western horizon. To go any further you have to leave the coast entirely and climb into the middle of the island, and the middle of Oahu turns out to be its most sacred ground. At the exact center of the island, in a field of red dirt, lie about 180 stones. There is no temple here, no walls, no structure, nothing that announces itself, just a clearing on the plateau between the two mountain ranges, a stand of trees, and stones lying in the grass. This is Kūkaniloko, and for centuries it was the most important birthplace in Hawaii. Chiefly women came here to give birth. A child born at Kūkaniloko, in the presence of the right witnesses and with the correct observances, held the highest possible rank. 36 stones in the complex are said to represent the 36 chiefs who attended and confirmed what they saw. The mechanics were precise. Drums announced the birth. The newborn was carried immediately to a nearby temple, where the umbilical cord was cut and the child's genealogy was recited aloud. Rank in this society was not claimed, it was witnessed, and then it was remembered. The practice ran for centuries, from perhaps the 12th century until it faded sometime after the 1600s. Look at where it sits, and the choice makes sense. The sky is open in every direction, and to the southwest the Waiʻanae range, with Kahala at its high point and the notch at Kolekole beside it, is traditionally read as the profile of a pregnant woman. What surrounds the site now is farmland. Most of the wider complex was lost when the central plateau was plowed for sugar and pineapple. The 5 acres that survive were protected as a monument in the 1990s, and a local Hawaiian civic club has maintained the ground for over half a century. There is very little to see. That is rather the point. You stand in a field where the highest-ranking people in the islands were born, and nothing about it performs for you. Descend the western slope from here, and you reach the coast that visitors drive past without stopping, the driest, sunniest, and least understood shore on the island. There is a bog on top of the driest side of the island. That sentence should not be true, and yet it is. Mount Kahala rises to just over 4,000 feet, the highest point on Oahu, and its summit is not a peak at all. It is a flat plateau roughly a mile across, permanently waterlogged, holding a cloud forest and a bog full of species that exist nowhere else. Below it, the leeward coast bakes in sun almost every day of the year. This is the older half of Oahu. The Waiʻanae volcano built this range from lava dated to around 3.9 million years ago, and it stopped erupting roughly 2.5 million years ago. It has had far longer to erode than the Kūaloa, and it shows. The ridges are sharper, the valleys cut deeper. Four of those valleys open onto the coast: Nanakuli, Lualuale, Waiʻanae, Makaha, each one a broad amphitheater of dry grass and rock running back into the mountains. Makaha has a place in surfing history most visitors never learn. Before the North Shore became the center of the sport, this was where big wave surfing was taken seriously, and international competitions were run here through the middle of the 20th century. The wave is still there. The crowds went elsewhere. That sentence describes the whole coast. The leeward side is the least visited part of Oahu, and the most lived in. There are no resorts along most of it. The beaches are used by the people who live behind them. Fishing here is not a recreational activity, it is dinner. At the northern end, the road narrows and the cliffs close in. Then the pavement ends again, at the other side of the same gap you walked earlier. The leeward coast keeps its own council. Follow it back east, and the land finally closes the circle. It ends at a harbor that was once the richest water in Hawaii. And then, on one morning, the most consequential, before it was Pearl Harbor, it was the richest water on the island. The Hawaiian name for this place is Puʻuloa, the long hill, and the wider bay was called Kaʻaʻawa Puʻuloa, the many-harbored sea, 3 locks branching inland, fed by the streams of every land division in the district. It was the only place in the islands where all the waters of a region met in one body. It was also called Waimomi, the water of pearl. The oysters here were famous. The people here believed the harbor had a guardian, a shark named Kahahupahau, who protected swimmers and fishermen, and whose home this was. When the United States Navy began dredging the entrance in the late 1800s, they were warned. What the dredging created was one of the finest natural anchorages in the Pacific. the morning of 7 December 1941, the first aircraft appeared over the harbor just before 8 o'clock. A second wave arrived around 50 minutes later. By 10 in the morning it was over. In under 2 hours, more than 2,400 people were killed, including civilians. 19 warships were sunk or damaged. Hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground. More than half of the dead were on a single ship. The battleship Arizona was hit forward, and its magazine detonated. 1,177 men died aboard her, most of them within minutes. She is still there. The memorial stands across her hull, not touching it, and oil still rises from the wreck and spreads across the surface in thin colors. Above the city, in another crater, the story finishes. Puʻuloa means hill of sacrifice, and long before Western contact, it was a place where those who broke certain kapu were put to death. In 1949, it became the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific. The first person buried there was an unknown serviceman killed at Pearl Harbor. From the rim you can see Diamond Head, the city, and the harbor, the whole southern coast of the island, and everything that happened on it. The island is easiest to understand from above. From here the whole shape of it resolves. Two mountain ranges, one older and sharper in the west, one younger and torn open in the east. Between them a plateau where the highest-ranking people in these islands were born. Around the edge, one continuous coastline that carried everything. The green wall catches the rain, and the rain feeds the valleys, and the valleys fed the fish ponds, and the fish ponds fed the chiefs, and the chiefs fought for this island because it could feed more people than anywhere else in the chain. The harbor that made it valuable to a kingdom is the harbor that made it valuable to an empire. The waves that made it sacred are the waves that made it famous. None of that is separate. It is one thing, seen from different heights. The beach was a royal surf ground and a taro wetland. The crater was a fortress, and before that a landmark, and before that a single afternoon's eruption. The sunset falls on a headland where an entire culture believed the dead departed, and where the birds have only recently come back. The island did not hide any of this. It simply stopped being asked. Dawn again over the windward cliffs, the same light as the beginning, and the water going from black to blue along a coast that has been read, farmed, fought over, sanctified and photographed for something close to 1,000 years. This is the gathering place.